welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. And currently, I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today, please welcome Dr. Susan Kahn, author of the book Reinvent Yourself: Psychological Insights That Will Transform Your Work Life. Susan, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, thank you very much. And I love this book, especially as a 64-year-old who's constantly reinventing himself. And people are wondering, as they've gone through, some people just one career their whole life, is there still life after 60 even, or even after 50? So I'm thrilled to have you today. And so I'd like to start by talking about how you got here with your career, and then tell us why you wrote the book.
Okay, well, I'm a business psychologist, and that is quite a useful kind of headline to cover quite a lot of things. I work as an executive coach and as a mediator and as a group relations consultant. But I think fundamentally my role is as an observer of working life. I'm very curious as to what's really going on in organizations when leaders come with challenges, what's really happening. And I arrived at this role through a route from social anthropology, which is essentially an observing role, through telecoms, and then on to working in a psychodynamic way with organizations. So I love my work, and it's constantly offering me new insights. And that led me, I think, to writing this book, because I think, like you, I don't want it to end when I get to a certain stage. I'd like to think that there's always something new. And I do really believe that we have the potential to change direction, to pivot, to take on new roles, to start doing new things, even if we imagine we're not in the criteria that suggests we should be starting anew.
Yeah, I also think that our generation wants to remain relevant longer. This whole concept of retiring at our 60s, and nobody really wants to do that. I mean, I know plenty of business executives from the 80s and 90s, and they even look younger because they stayed with it, as opposed to people who had retired and their minds have atrophied some, right? So I think this book was super relevant when I saw it a year ago, and it will continue to be so. So how does, in chapter one, how does acknowledging the cyclical and unpredictable nature of work influence the way we approach career planning and personal growth?
Mm. Well, I think the reality of work is that historically there was some kind of sense of anticipating what your work life might look like. You know, perhaps our parents' generation or our grandparents' generation might think, all right, I'll follow this career. That's what I'll do for the duration of my working life. And that now is completely upended, you know, both in terms of technology and big data and global needs and communication. We don't necessarily know the jobs that our kids are going to be having, and we don't necessarily know the work that we'll be doing in an AI world in another kind of future. So the ability to stay open to doing new things, to transferring skills to other areas, is really, really important. And the cyclical nature is that we often sort of repeat, you know, we maybe turn to skills we have, maybe that's in leadership or communication or in developing technical knowledge and expertise. So we do apply things in different ways, but it's one thing for sure. It's going to change. Whatever we're doing now is not going to be the thing that we're going to be doing in 10 years' time.
I think today, more so than any time, expertise is more valued, because when we're teaching students, and a lot of professors are worried that AI will make us obsolete. The fact is, unless you know the right questions to ask, which requires the right expertise, you're not going to get the right answers for it. And so, do you think this concept of mandatory retirement actually needs to be retired itself?
Yeah, I don't like the term retirement. It sounds so kind of ageist. It sounds so kind of negative because the hope is that even if we divert into a new way of operating, we're not necessarily doing nothing. The sort of retiring literally sort of makes you feel like lying down on a bed or lying down on a couch and doing nothing. But you mentioned AI, for example, and the way in which we engage with AI, certainly from my academic background, is one that illustrates very beautifully the potential for reinvention. It's not going to answer everyone's job needs. It's not going to be the way that we actually fix everything. But we can use it. If we're open to it, we can use it to help us understand the potential for the tools, the access to knowledge, as long as we do that with a critical eye and with a sense that we still have the lived human experience that allows us to interpret things in a meaningful way.
What are some examples from your own life where you've experienced the unfreeze, move, refreeze model of change as described by Kurt Lewin? And if you can explain who he is.
Yeah, Kurt Lewin is a psychologist who brought us the notion of group dynamics. And he was living in Nazi Germany, and he had a strong sense that those of us who work together have a responsibility to recognize the value of all voices. It's not something that should be decided by one person, but that we should be caring for the whole. And he introduced this notion of unfreezing, moving, and refreezing as a way of understanding change. And it's a very visual way of imagining something which is frozen, something which is fixed. In order for it to change shape, in order for it to be something else, it needs to melt, it needs to move into another shape. And then it moves and then refreezes in a new shape, and we need to do something to hold it there in that new formation. Um, for me, I think this is really a live example of how I've gone through the Lewin model in that prior to COVID, I was very much anti teaching online, having coaching relationships online. I was very keen on establishing relationships face to face. And once we had no choice but to deliver our lectures, our courses, our coaching relationships online, I then had to adapt. So I unfroze from being this person who only did what I felt was the most meaningful work in person to recognizing that there's different ways of connecting, that we can use tools like we're using today to make proper connections with people. And that's now something I can't imagine working without. It gives me a global audience. It gives me an opportunity to reach so many more people. And it's been a really wonderful lesson for me.
What do multiple roles and identities hold? I'm a teacher, but also a poet and a chef, impact the way we define ourselves professionally. In what ways might embracing these multiple selves support reinvention, especially when people like to put people in boxes and just have them be almost static, right, in terms of how they describe themselves?
Yeah, I mean we're quite vulnerable individuals on the whole. And so having a hook on which to place ourselves, I'm a lawyer, I'm a lecturer, I'm a doctor, I'm a physician, or I'm an oncologist, gives you a very kind of clear indication of the kind of person you are, your status, the fact that you're smart or not smart. So you have an indication of who you are. But of course, that's only a fraction of your entirety, a fraction of who you are as a person. Inevitably, you take up other roles, maybe as a carer, maybe as somebody who's interested in the creative world, somebody who's a partner, a lover, a friend, all these other things. But I think it does kind of suit social encounters to have this very kind of neat label placed on you. But for me, the most meaningful encounters are the ones where people don't just stay in that box and they do actually refer to the other things that matter to them as well.
In what ways does society discomfort around discussing money affect our career choices and sense of fulfillment at work? And you see studies that 77% of people are unhappy in what they do.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's such a cultural no-no to speak about the money that you earn for the work you do. From an analytic perspective, there's a strong sense that we associate our value with the money that we earn. So in order to feel good about ourselves, we have to be earning a lot of money. And certainly certain parents have that demand on their children that they need to for reasons that might well be about concern around their security, that they have to earn well in order to be living a good life. But we don't really have a very honest relationship with money. We're embarrassed to talk about it. Certainly in the UK, it's not something that's discussed very much at all. In fact, you're more likely to talk about your infidelity than you are to talk about the amount of money you earn. That's how taboo a subject it is. But that is changing a little bit. We have got people talking about the need to talk about the value of money, and certainly some groups, like, some women sometimes underestimate their value in the marketplace because they're not able to confront the topic of money in an open way. So I think it has a lot to say. It's also, who do we pay a lot? Do we pay nurses? Do we pay teachers? Or do we pay tech entrepreneurs? Who are the people that get the money?
Reflecting on the concept of regret discussed in the chapter two, what is the one decision or opportunity in your past that you didn't pursue, and how might that shape the way you approach future choices or even reinvention?
Mm. Well, it's interesting because the thought of regret is something which is quite sort of preoccupying for many people. Either that's in terms of I wish I'd taken that job, or I wish I'd pursued that relationship, or I wish I'd sort of written that book, or I wish I'd sort of taken that job. My own experience of regret is a bit tempered by the circumstances and the context in which I failed to take up an opportunity. I had the chance to go and work in Hong Kong, and I didn't take it. And it's always something that I felt would have been the most wonderful opportunity, the wonderful chance to live in a different culture, to experience a different way of working. And I didn't take that opportunity because we had a loss in my family. I lost my mum at quite a young age, and I didn't feel that I could leave my extended family, which probably was the right decision at the time, but it is illustrative of the fact that it's never really straightforward. So regret is almost entirely made up of lots of could be's or if onlys. And to be at peace with whatever decision you've made is the most important thing. And I'm at peace with that, but I can still hold on to the fact that wouldn't it have been lovely if I'd had the chance to go and work in Hong Kong?
Well, maybe we can give you the chance to work in Vietnam
Ah,
at our university. So I'll write to you about that because your background would be great to have here
oh,
at our school as well. And maybe it's just as an adjunct where you teach a class for a certain, a semester, and you're here part of the time, so you get that experience. So we can make up for what you might have missed in Hong Kong.
that sounds very exciting. Lovely.
How do you personally experience, I hope I pronounced this right, liminality, the in-between phase of change, and what strategies help you navigate the uncertainty when your identity or role is in transition?
Mm. Yeah, liminality is such a useful term, such a useful framework. It actually comes from anthropology. And the idea that when we're moving from one stage of life to another, for example, when we're moving from childhood to adolescence, or adolescence to adulthood, or adulthood to parenthood, we go through periods where things are literally up in the air. We are completely kind of upended. If we think about an adolescent who's getting used to their adult body, getting used to the hormones, getting used to their sort of sense of agency in the world, things are literally mad. And again, when we become parents for the first time, things are completely upended. So, liminality is really that period of in between when we're not settled in our new form, and yet we know that change is coming. And for some people, that's a super exciting place to be. If you don't like certainty, if you like adventure, if you like a sense of the unknown, then being in a liminal phase can be just thrilling because you don't know what's coming next. But for some people, it can be quite anxiety provoking. You know, you maybe get made redundant and you don't know what's happening next. Um, that could be an opportunity for learning, for growth, for exploration, for going to work in a different place. But it could also be a time of worry. For me, I find talking, understandably, because my work is psychodynamic, working with either a thinking partner or a therapist or a coach or in supervision to try and understand what this in between phase might be telling me. And also to recognize that it's always great to be able to just review where we're at and think, what do I really want? What do I really want to do next? So I
Um,
love liminality as a concept. I think it's so helpful.
How can we better distinguish between the kind of discomfort that leads to personal growth and the kind that signals it's time to walk away?
Yeah, yeah. It's hard, isn't it? And this links back to regret a little bit, but there is a very comfortable place that we can rest. You know, we perhaps are doing things that we know are well received. We're competent. We're doing things well, and that comfort zone does give us some kind of satisfaction. But what it doesn't do is allow us to grow, allow us to try out new skills, allow us to make new connections, allow us to see ourselves in a different light. And I think that the test as to whether this is a damage inducing situation, i.e., that you're pushing yourself so much that you're going to burn out, a sense of stimulation, excitement, kind of interest, is one that you have to monitor quite closely, and your own self-knowledge will help you with that. You know, are you on the edge of collapse, or are you just at that point where you're fired up with excitement and energy and thoughts and ideas?
In what ways can we honor past identities while embracing reinvention, especially when our roles have defined how others see us and how we see ourselves?
Mm. It's a great question because I think for many of us who are looking to move in another direction, there's a degree of loss associated with leaving a different profession. I know that when I decided to leave a tenured role at a university, I found it quite difficult to let go of the fact that I was a member of academic staff and to move into being somebody who worked independently. And I realized that my sense of worth was quite tied up with the fact that I liked the status of being part of a university. And once I recognized that I could move on and still have all those experiences, still have all those sort of programs that I developed, still have the relationships with academics and colleagues, then it made that transition actually rather liberating because I didn't enjoy the administrative side of academic life. I loved the teaching, I loved the students, I loved the research, but I didn't enjoy the administration.
Nobody does, and it's getting worse.
I'm
Yeah, it's all
sorry.
of us. All of us say that, just like doctors say. It used to be fun practicing being a doctor, but now with all the rules and regulations and everything you have to fill out, it strangles you from what you really want to do and what you love and why you got into it in the first place. How do you recommend balancing the need for clear planning with the flexibility required to adapt when unexpected opportunities or setbacks arise during your reinvention?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, this difference between kind of reacting to opportunities and proactively seeking out things is kind of relevant here. Um, if we have an open mind to possibilities, then we will see possibilities. So I think those that are somewhat stuck in the roles they're in will find it quite hard to reinvent if they have a mindset that's fixed on the thing that they've always done. So I think that having both the freedom in your mind to connect to other opportunities and the ability to react to things as they come along. So when someone says to you, I mean, rather like you said to me just now, how about coming and doing some lecturing in Vietnam? Great, that sounds very exciting. But you have to be able to react in the moment, not necessarily with that issue, but with others, to be able to be responsive, to be porous, to be not closed to opportunities. And we started talking about age at the beginning, and sometimes people do get a bit stuck. They think, I'm 40, I can't possibly retrain, or I'm 50, there's no way I could start doing this, or I'm 60, this is, the end, and on through the decades. And I think that that is a false narrative.
Yeah, I actually just gave a speech last week and I gave a TED talk about just saying yes.
Ah,
I say yes to everything.
wonderful.
Because I want to experience as many things as I can. And I kind of feel like we don't grow, and there's no age that we can stop growing. So why not try as many different things as possible? I mean, you have to say no in terms of people gobbling up your time. Because that's all you have. But in terms of experiences and trying new things and doing things, that are going to make life much more interesting and make you a more interesting person. I think saying yes is very important.
Yeah, and it's wonderful to hear you describe that. Some of my clients hold themselves back because they don't necessarily believe in themselves. They don't feel that they're worthy or that they've got the skills or the talents. And some of the work I do with them is to help them see that give it a go. Try, see how it goes, do that exercise of saying yes to things that you described so eloquently.
I hear my when I interview high school students and they tell me about a dream, I go, all right, let's give it a try. Come back to me in a week with a plan. And they just look at me, they're like surprised, like,
Yeah.
seriously? I said, yeah, come back to me in a week. I'll host you for lunch or I'll host you for coffee. And let's see where this goes. And a lot of them try it and they're like amazed because nobody's really given them the encouragement to move themselves forward. We have a question from the audience. Is this based on many dimensions of mindfulness? Will you have a next level or a book too?
It's interesting. I do have another book coming out, but it's not solely about reinvention. It's about a topic that I'm very interested in. It's about envy, and it's about how envy can be something which is debilitating and destructive, but can also be quite motivating. So if you look at someone who's done well, you can think, right, what next? How do I then go in that direction? So there's some connection there to reinvention. But your question asks about mindfulness, and I think that that is at the heart of reinvention, knowing yourself, recognizing where you might have space to grow, allowing yourself to take up opportunities. So that's certainly a theme around lots of the work that I do.
In your discussion of self-doubt, which we were just talking about, and career construction theory, how can individuals differentiate between legitimate self-assessment and internalized societal limitations around gender, age, or ethnicity? And that may be shaping their perceived capabilities, especially right for years, women limited themselves because of what people thought they should be.
Mm. Yeah, I think that that is a question that applies to different genders. It applies to people who struggle with different health issues. It can apply to people who are struggling with health issues in work, this sense of, can I do this because I am somebody who has a chronic condition, or I am somebody who's disabled in one way, or I am somebody who is going to be 70 next year, or whatever that thing might be. And I think there are clearly some things that probably aren't that achievable. As much as I would like to visualize myself running across the finishing line of the New York Marathon, is unlikely to happen, as I've never run more than 5K, but it is a possible, but it's unlikely. I'm unlikely to ever be a brain surgeon. I'm unlikely
Yes.
to do certain things. However, I think it's perfectly feasible. I mean, I didn't write my books until I was in my 40s and 50s. So, becoming a writer is something that happened much later in life. I didn't do my PhD until I was in my 40s. So, had I asked myself, when I graduated in my 20s, would I be doing this? I'd think, no way. So you have to stay open, and but a degree of being on the ground. Do you need to earn a certain amount of money? Do you need to have a degree of variety and stimulation that keeps you mentally alert and well? What are the criteria that are really important for you?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. And of course, as much as I would love to be a great singer, that's not in the cards for me either. How can individuals distinguish between healthy perseverance toward a goal, which is kind of what you were just talking about, and the kind of stubborn commitment that leads to burnout or identity foreclosure?
Mm. I mean, there is a lot of burnout. I think that there was a recent press report that said, over 80% of the workforce are close to, or in the UK, are close to or experiencing symptoms of burnout, which is huge. And I think that there is a very pressurized environment at the moment. But my message to anybody who's reading the book, or who's looking at considering their kind of future, is take care of yourself. Some people feel that self-compassion is a bit airy-fairy, it's a bit indulgent. But my strong feeling is that if you have, to use the old meme of, if you've got your oxygen mask on, you can then have the strength and the energy to help and support others. You can do good work if you're in a good place. But if you're sleep deprived, if you're working all hours, if you're saying yes to things in a destructive way, i.e., rather than saying yes to opportunities, you're just being overloaded with work, then you will reach a point where your resilience reserves are so low that you can't function. So you have to take care of yourself, and giving some time to think about that is really important.
In your experience training psychologists, have you seen the practice of pause and silence influence decision making or identity development in students or professionals?
Absolutely. I love silence, and particularly when I'm teaching, or whether I'm doing supervision work or demonstrating uh, coaching techniques, the space that's filled with silence can often be the most thoughtful work. If we just pause for a moment and allow people to have thoughts, if we pose a question, and rather than rushing in with a response, we allow people time to ponder, to think, to note the reaction in their bodies, then we have an opportunity to really get much more data, to really understand what's going on. And it kind of counteracts that kind of slightly manic need to have an answer straight away, to get things done, to move forward. And sometimes we need time to think, do I want to do this? Am I the right person? Is this something that I'm, dreaming about? Or is this something I just feel obliged to do because I owe this person a favor? So, as a takeaway, I would say lose your fear of silence to anyone who's listening, bring it into every conversation, allow people to have some time to think.
How can individuals practically cultivate a high performing neural environment in a typical workday, especially in a high stress or fast paced professions?
Yeah. I mean, this idea of sort of creating a neural environment that supports us is so obvious and yet not done so often. So the idea that we create conditions that allow us to either respond to high energy people or to allow ourselves time to think or allow ourselves time to rest, we have the capacity through our breath, through our thoughts, through our physical exertion to create a better environment for ourselves. So, if we think about, many people have seen Amy Cuddy's wonderful TED Talk where she uses body language to create a power pose that not only changes the neural patterns within herself, within the individual, but also allows other people to see them as more powerful. So there are many tools and techniques that we can use with, as I've said, breath work, the way we think, allowing pauses, allow time to recognize the environment we're going in. We don't want to go onto the TED Talk stage, as you've just done, feeling so sleepy and so relaxed and so chilled that we've got no energy to convey our message to the audience. We want to go in with power, with energy, with communication. So we have a chance to influence that, and we're learning more and more about how to do that.
You describe coaches as facilitators of self-directed neuroplasticity. How might this concept reshape traditional approaches to leadership development or employee training in organizations? And you'll have to explain what that means, neuroplasticity.
Um, I mean, self-directed neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the essentially the ability of the brain to change itself. There's a wonderful image of a brain just over your shoulder. We, for many centuries, thought that the brain was an organ that only got smaller over time. And the beauty of functional magnetic resonance imaging allows us to see the way that the brain can change and can develop and can create new neurons. You'll all be familiar, I'm sure, with the work of Daniel Kahneman and thinking fast
Yeah.
and slow. And essentially, what we're doing when we're thinking fast is responding emotionally with those patterns, those connections that are very well worn. So someone asks you, will you do something? You say yes straight away. That is a pattern that is established. Somebody asks you to take a walk to the corner, you don't need to think about it too much. It's established. But the thinking slow element is the part that creates new neural pathways. And creating our own self-directed neuroplasticity is really just a sort of a posh way of saying we can allow ourselves to think differently about the opportunities in front of us, about the way we respond to things, so that we can, for example, using Marty Seligman's work on positive psychology, with some very simple steps of just noting three good things that we've done in the day, change our neural plasticity over a very short period of time. So it's a hugely powerful tool.
So funny you mentioned Marty Seligman. I actually ran a company based on his research.
Ah,
Um, as how do you overcome basically how do you overcome difficulties in life? And so a group of people had licensed that research, and then we created a company around that to help people get to the next level. So it's so funny that you should mention him
yeah.
there, that because I spent 10 years at the Wharton School where he teaches.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Yeah.
how can individuals effectively balance the optimism encouraged by a growth or abundance mindset with the caution suggested by illusion of control, especially when planning for personal reinvention?
Mm. I mean, the illusion of control is something that we perhaps don't focus on as much as we should. The idea, I mean, we're looking at a world that is in a pretty fragile state at the moment, a lot of uncertainty. The idea of a VUCA world never felt more real. You know, we are going through politically, you know, environmentally, economically, some really big kind of changes. So even if we decided that we wanted to control the narrative about things, we're not necessarily going to be able to fix the economy, direct things, know how things work. But what we can do is have the kind of expansive mindset that allows us to think that things aren't fixed. Yes, there might be economic challenges. Yes, there might be issues around geopolitical issues. But we can look at those circumstances and think about how we might make changes, how we could um, reckon with failure, how we could cope with things that didn't go well. So, this idea of having a growth mindset is not necessarily unrealistic. It's just about saying, rather than I failed, therefore I'm a failure, it's the idea of saying, I failed. What have I learned? How can I improve as a result of this?
You challenge the idea that age limits our capacity to reinvent ourselves. How have your own views on reinvention evolved over time, and what personal experiences influence this perspective?
Hmm. Yeah, well, I think that when I first started training in the world of psychodynamics, I had a view that really you had to be expert with all the answers in order to be a good consultant, in order to be a good leader. And that learning around the fact that when you help people with process, when you help people to find the solutions themselves, that is offering them the best opportunity for growth. That was a major kind of turning point for me that came after, you know, quite a lot of years working in telecoms and letting go of the idea that I had to have all the answers. So I think that that sort of fundamental change wasn't necessarily linked to tasks or events, but was very much linked to the way I thought about how to consult, how to lead, and how to support people.
You introduced several psychological tools like CBT, REBT, and the work to combat self-limiting beliefs. How do you suggest readers decide which approach is most effective for their individual circumstance?
Mm. Well, I think we need to explore, we need to try things out. Sometimes people will have a fantastic outcome from doing hypnotherapy. Some people like physical exercise as a means to change the way they work. Some people like to do CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, that's very much linked to challenging thoughts as opposed to imagining that those thoughts are real. So, looking very much at our behavioral things. So, I think there's a whole smorgasbord of opportunities for us to challenge our thinking. And don't be afraid to play around and to see if something works for you. See if you can find a coach or a therapist or a thinking partner that might want to play with some ideas. And there's loads of exercises in the book that gives you a chance to just try things out and see what is helpful for you. Bearing in mind that things change all the time. You know, we can do something which is really helpful 1 month, and then the next month we want to do something different.
How can organizations move beyond surface level diversity policies to effectively address the intersectionality of ageism with other forms of discrimination, such as race, gender, or disability in the workplace? And now, of course, in the United States, President Trump is pushing against that kind of thinking to be more diverse and gender acceptable and all these types of things. So, what's your take on all of this?
Mm. And I was actually at a conference yesterday where there was a panel around DEI experts who were talking about their changed relationship to their role following these are mainly global organizations following the about face that the Trump administration has made in terms of DEI policies. And one of the messages I took from that panel was that we need to go back to values, that perhaps we're not calling things by the name of diversity linked to um, learning needs or age or ethnicity, but what we should be thinking about is values. Do we respect our people? Do we offer everybody the chance to learn? Do we consider nurturing and supporting people? So I don't think there's a simple answer to this, but I think having the conversation in organizations is vital. We shouldn't just brush it under the carpet and we can't just ignore it, because we are such a diverse and such a complex group of working people that we need to understand what those individual needs are. So looking at the individual and looking at how that fits in the organization as well.
And you mentioned that in chapter 6, you mentioned that reinvention involves moving between roles of leader and follower. How can individuals recognize when it's time to shift from these roles, especially in fast changing or high pressure environments? I have to say, though, I work with a lot of 18 to 21-year-olds that I'm following at 64 because they just know more about the subject than I do. So going from running 30 startups and being in charge to actually following somebody else.
Yeah, that's such you're role modeling actually what I think I'm writing about in the book, which is that it's not a linear thing. You don't kind of go through your working life with an ambition to reach the kind of pinnacle of an organization and to stay there. Very often by being a follower, we learn so much. And, with all the dramatic changes that are going on, certainly with technology, we need to look to others to learn from them. So I think that the value there is in being a follower is sometimes underestimated. There's this sense that I've just got to be the leader, I've just got to be the one who's in charge, who's making all the decisions. But we can get a lot from our follower roles, and we can do it in very different ways. And that can also mean that you become a better leader, or as a leader, you become a better follower.
In discussing thought leadership, you emphasize bravery and visibility. What advice would you give to someone with valuable insights, but who struggles with self-doubt or imposter syndrome when stepping into a thought leadership role? I think this really applies a lot to younger people who feel like, I don't know why I'm in this role, or why would somebody trust me with this?
Mm. Yeah, there can be a sort of a false idea in people's mind that in order to be the thought leader, they have to look a certain way, they have to have a certain amount of experience, they have to be like their imagined kind of figure of authority. And I think that the reason I mention courage in context of thought leadership is that sometimes what you're doing is saying things that very much go against the grain. If you're working in an environment that is psychologically safe, where you do feel you're able to contradict somebody who is perhaps more senior than you and to offer an alternative perspective, that can then mean that you're nurtured and you do continue to have this role as a thought leader. It's not hierarchically based. We have, as we said previously, got so much to learn from people of different ages and different groups. So I think that building that sense of recognition that everybody has a little dose of being an imposter, even those who are at the top of organizations, who are professors, who have got multiple awards, if they're really good, I would say they have a dose of imposter within them, because they're always thinking, how can I be better? How can I develop? How can I improve? So I don't think it's such a terrible thing to have a little bit of imposter syndrome, as long as it's not debilitating and limiting your chance to try new things.
You describe leadership reinvention as a shift from doing to being. How can early career professionals balance the development of technical skills with this deeper self-awareness without feeling like they're falling behind in performance?
Yeah. I mean, we talked about how comforting it is to have that label. You know, when we go and we meet someone, we're networking and we say, I'm a lawyer or I'm a computer programmer or whatever you are. That label can be very reassuring because it's understood and it defines very clearly what your skills are. When you're moving away from that technical role to a more leadership role where you're thinking about strategy, you're thinking about complexities across your client base, across the sector, across the organization, you often do step further away from the technical skills that got you there. So I would say that what you need to do is work hard on your leadership style, on your ability to communicate, on your sense of those softer leadership skills so that you can actually retain a sense of knowledge around your technical ability, but also be able to step up into a more strategic, visionary kind of role as well.
You referenced Liz Wiseman, who's been on our show, Multipliers, and that hedgehog and fox metaphor. What practical advice would you give to someone trying to describe whether to deepen their specialist path or a transition into leadership, especially in a hybrid or multi-hyphen roles, which I think a lot of companies are looking to right now because they want to reduce headcount and they're
Yeah.
expecting people to be able to do multiple things.
Mm. I think that links to your previous question, and that sometimes there's the sense of if I'm leading this department or this company, I need to be good at everything that's going on in this company, and it's just impossible. You can't be. So I think Liz's model of being a multiplier is so enriching. The idea that as a leader, you're helping people who work with you to become more competent, to become more capable, to recognize their values and skills against those of us who perhaps are feeling a bit more fragile about your capabilities. And so you tend to diminish and limit and control behavior. Because that's a way of actually just staying in charge of everything that's going on. So I think that broadening mindset, that idea that you cannot be expert at everything is really important. And the parable of the fox and the hedgehog is a really nice way of kind of illustrating that as well.
In chapter 7, you discuss both external and internal causes of feeling stuck. How do you recommend readers begin to distinguish between truly external obstacle and internal narrative disguised as one?
Mm. Well, I think that the internal narrative is the thing that we need to address first. Sometimes there really are limited opportunities to grow. But usually it's our own internal voice that's limiting us. We're the ones that are saying, you're not good enough for that, or, you'll fail if you do that, or everyone will laugh if you try and get promoted into that role, or you're not creative, or you're too stupid for this. We tend to have a very persecutory inner language, which needs to change in order for us to grasp the opportunities that are out there. And sometimes that inner voice stops us from actually seeing those concrete opportunities that do exist externally. So, again, in the book, I've got lots of exercises and examples for you to work through where you begin to, first of all, recognize the unkind way in which you might be speaking to yourself, and to challenge that and to bring a more benevolent, kind, almost loving voice to yourself in the way that you would to a friend you cared about, so that you can then take the opportunities that exist. And if they're not in your immediate horizon, that you might well look further afield to see what's out there.
In chapter 7, you highlight the value of failure in reinvention. Yet research suggests we often resist learning from failure because it bruises our ego. How can we build the emotional resilience needed to truly learn from failure instead of avoiding it? And as an entrepreneur, we thrive on failure. I mean,
Mm.
that's where we learn the most, and we embrace it. But folks who aren't entrepreneurs typically find this very difficult to do.
Yeah, we have a lot to learn from entrepreneurs. It's almost not sort of a badge of honor, but just an essential quality to keep trying, to fail, to learn, to keep trying again. It's something which is part of the entrepreneur's DNA. And those who work in more traditional environments are often punished quite cruelly for their failures. So they begin to be discouraged from owning up when things have gone wrong and hide their failures, or even worse, don't even try to do something that's a little bit challenging because there's a fear of failure. And this is where I think culturally there's, and I think this is a fairly global phenomenon. People don't particularly associate failure with the idea of learning. You know, that an acronym FAIL, which is first attempt is learning. You know, the idea that we can not possibly grow, not possibly expand our understanding unless we do have some failures. And indeed, if we think about all the things that really taught us, um, well, it will be those things that went wrong that gave us an opportunity to rethink and to then move in another direction with that knowledge. So it's fantastic data for us.
I think as entrepreneurs, we never learn anything from success because we really don't know why it worked
Mm.
out as well as it did. But when things go wrong, we easily can go and start, when we look back, changes might make in it. So
Yeah.
I think it's invaluable for people to embrace the failure and realize it's just part of everyday life, and that's how you get better.
Okay,
Your
wonderful.
chapter highlights the value of failure and reinvention, yet research suggests we often resist learning failure because of the bruises of our ego. Oh, I'm sorry. You mentioned that self-doubt, often viewed negatively, can actually fuel greatness when managed with humility. How can individuals distinguish between healthy questioning that drives growth and the kind of imposter syndrome that leads to paralysis or even burnout?
Mm. So I think we can all probably identify quite easily those narcissistic leaders that surround us, and they perhaps don't have that dose of questioning whether they've got things right. And I think that self-doubt can serve a purpose. It can allow us to interrogate decisions. It can allow us to reflect on whether we do have the right skills, whether we are the right person, whether we did do things in the right way. So it's not something that I would dismiss, self-doubt. I think it's something that's quite healthy. It's very human. We are vulnerable creatures. We often doubt ourselves. So I would encourage people to look at where their self-doubt sits. Is this really realistic? Is it something that you need to question? Is there somebody you really trust that you can ask, do you think I'm right to doubt my ability to do this? I would join you in the self-doubt around my singing, but I think it's based very solidly in data that says I cannot sing very well. But if I wanted to check in with somebody on my ability to deliver a talk, then my self-doubt might lead me to improvement, but it doesn't mean that I can't do that talk.
Yeah, I think that we're always looking when we do talks and how did it come out? We're asking people who from the audience or people who brought us in, is this what your expectation was and could have been better in some way? So we keep constantly improving things that we think we're good at, but we want to still get better at.
Yeah. And that kindness that we can offer ourselves that say, we're not going to please everybody all the time. There are going to be some people who like what we have to say and the way we say it, and others who it doesn't suit. And that's okay. We can't be everything to everyone.
Well, you know that as a professor, right? Because when you get your student reviews and you see all these good reviews, and there may be two or three that aren't, and that's all you fixate on is the two or three that aren't and wonder why did it not work out for them?
Mm. And that's hardwired. That's the negativity bias that exists in our neural pathways. But recognizing that can help us then to make peace with that.
How can individuals with avoidant or disorganized attachment styles begin building a supportive network without becoming overwhelmed or withdrawing from the process entirely?
Mm. I mean, I think that recognizing that networking for some individuals who have extrovert personalities, who really enjoy embracing new people and new contexts, is something that for others is a most terrifying place. It's like going into the lion's den. It's something that they feel very anxious about. It's something that they fear. But I think that, as with most things, practice helps you get better. So there's some guidance in the book about taking small steps with your networking, finding ways to gently enter the arena and give yourself a chance to make connections, because it's through that wonderful body of others that we get to grow, we get to learn, and we get to share who we are and what we have to offer. So it's not a level playing field. Some people find networking incredibly easy and enjoyable and energizing, and for others it can be really depleting. So just practice, recognize what your style is, and give yourself some realistic sort of goals in terms of that.
You mentioned the importance of bracketing and suspending judgment and building effective support networks. How can someone develop the skill in everyday conversation, especially outside a formal therapeutic setting?
Yeah. I mean, we do tend to leap to decisions about who people are and what their values are. And that could be based on our previous experience of authority figures. It could be based on our own kind of bias about particular individuals. But I think the most important thing is to check, to actually bracket the fact. I'm feeling a bit antagonistic to this person. Let me think about why that might be. Then go and take the time to get to know them and see whether it's based on anything real, or whether it's maybe something that's being dragged out from our past that doesn't belong in the current situation.
So here's our last question. In your experience, what are the most effective ways to invite and maintain a thinking partnership with someone from a completely different background or an industry, which I think kind of can open up your eyes to new possibilities?
Mm. I think that we should just ask people who are working in different ways to us. We can stay in a bit of an echo chamber often and just ask people who we know will agree with our thinking, which doesn't give us that enriching sense of learning. So I would say ask different people. And if they say no, that's okay. Just ask somebody else. We can learn so much from people who go about their working lives in different ways to us. It's not a judgment of one being right and one being wrong. Let's learn from each other.
Well, I thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. And the hour went super fast, and the book was terrific. And I think it's actually good for people of all ages to go and read it, not just for more mature people who are more where they're a little further along in their careers. So I look forward to your next book and having you back again.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for welcoming me so warmly.
And let's get you to Vietnam sometime so you can work with our kids out here as well.
Fantastic. That would be wonderful.
Everybody, have a good rest of your weekend. See you all next week. Take care, everybody.
Bye bye.